All right, good morning, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and kick the meeting off here. Thank you for joining today for the office hour to discuss the harvestable buffer practice that was recently added to ATCAP 50. Um, just a reminder, the ATCAP 50 rule was updated and fully published back in June, and one of the exciting changes in the new rule was some of the new and updated swarm cost share practices that were included. Really, the goal in adding some of these practices to AdCat 50 was to create some more tools for you, the counties, to have at your disposal to address local priorities, to address local resource concerns. Was a concept we had heard a lot of support for when we were doing some partner meetings back in 2020 leading into the rule revision process. So some very exciting but significant changes in how swarm cost share has been delivered in the past. And really, the goal today is just to provide you with some information on the new practice, answer any questions you have on implementation of harvestable buffers, and capture any suggestions or concerns that you may have, just so that we can put out the most helpful resources for you all. So, as far as the agenda for today goes, we'll start with the Swarm team, who will introduce some of the new web resources for the ATCAT 50 practices. Randy will talk a little bit about some of the how harvestable buffers fits into a soil health system. Cody will talk a little bit about the technical parts of the new practice, such as the standard. And then the Swarm team will wrap up with talking about some of the documentation requirements for harvestable buffers. And then we should have plenty of time to open it up for question and answer. All right, so at this time, I will kick it over to the Swarm team to talk about the web resources.
Hi, everyone. This is Susan Mockert. I'm going to be walking you through some updates to our webpage on the DATCAP website. This is the ATCAP 50 homepage that has been created. And a lot of our programs, as you'll see links below, are related to what's going on in ATCAP 50. And each of these web pages will have this block of green buttons at the top right that you can choose from to navigate to and from different sections. These buttons include a link to all of these office hours we've been holding. We've been recording them and we have them posted up here for you to go back and use if you would like to. And we also have a page that has practice-specific information, including on harvestable buffers, which we'll be talking about today. Return to top of page very easily. So however you tend to get into the DATCAP webpage, you should be able to find these buttons and find yourself back at the DATCAP ATCAP 50 homepage and be able to navigate amongst all the programs that are touched by that rule. That is all I would need to cover right now. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Susan. All right, let's shift gears to Randy Zogbaum to talk a little bit about soil health.
All right, thanks, Mark. As Mark mentioned, I'm going to just touch on here a little bit about how the harvestable buffers in this case fits into a soil health system. Of course, our soils are living, breathing biological systems, and the purpose of all of the conservation practices we do is to bring back the system into its full function so that we get the functions of the soil that provide us with the results we want. The big one that we're always concerned about is regulating water, of course, is a big part of the work we do in our conservation planning. With that, again, the point of that Mark brought up with a lot of these new practices is to really have the tools to be thinking about this in a planning or conservation planning processes. And with soil health, if we look at the different 5 different principles that lead back to soil health, the harvestable buffers fit into all of these in some way, shape, or form. But as you're working through planning with the farmers, with producers, with landowners, be keeping this in your mind as how we're working this into the system. That's the goal. And then as each one of these components fit in, then how do we get back to the full functioning system? And I will kind of leave it at that. We have a couple of resources I'll drop in the chat here. One is this form here is basically our website landing page for our soil health program. And then If you haven't yet, we also have an introduction to soil health training that I'll drop the link into as well. If you're not familiar with soils at all, it also links you back out to components of the nutrient management farmer education training that gives a good understanding of basic soil principles to start out with. With that, I'll pass it on to my friend and colleague, Mr. Calkins.
All right, thanks, Randy. Let me just share here. So I'll just get into some of the technical things about harvestable buffers today. When we're talking about harvestable buffers, we're talking about filter strips really. In AdCap 50, the primary practice that we're implementing is filter strip. However, there's some other considerations for this practice because it's going to be harvested. There's different kinds of maintenance that go along with that, different maybe seeding and other considerations for the type of forages that you're planting. So really, we're talking about filter strips, and the planning and establishing of filter strips comes from two tech notes. We're talking about establishing and maintaining introduced grasses and legumes from tech note 6, and then planning, design, management, and maintenance of vegetative filter strips in tech note 10. And that's where you get some of these guidelines for specifically if you're going to be harvesting a filter strip. We're looking at we want to see over 50% of that seed mix should be in grass. You should only harvest when the vegetation is well established at like 12 to 16 plants per square foot. And then there's, limitations for cutting height for introduced species. And then we're not talking about native species. So I can probably eliminate that from these slides. We're really only considering doing introduced grasses and legumes, not natives. And then the timing is important as well because we don't want to disturb the nesting season. There should be no mechanical removal before May 20th or after September 15th for those introduced species. So more information, and I can link these tech notes and the practice standard in the chat here, but all the information you'll need on just establishing filter strips in general and the harvesting and design and maintenance and all those kinds of things and management can be found within these technical notes. The more complicated part will come later with some of the contracting. So when we're talking about harvestable buffers, we're trying to distinguish them from filter strips in a couple key ways. And realistically, it's just the types of vegetation and the management. The benefits are basically the same. You're just getting some additional forage off of that when you need it. But really the management for harvestable buffers is going to be harvesting and maybe some intermittent mowing if you need to go and treat, woody species or other species that have moved in that you don't want. Whereas like filter strips, you have some kind of periodic mowing every couple of years to also do the same kind of maintenance. When you're talking about vegetation, we want to see that those grasses and basically grasses and legumes are suited for that periodic kind of harvest throughout the year, and that they're specifically for that forage. So, you're not planting species that, aren't suited for forage. And then for filter strips, we're talking about perennial plants that are just left undisturbed. But really, they're indistinguishable from filter strips. It's just how you go about managing them and what species you're planting that we're talking about. Just some additional tools and resources. It's really hard to get to these seeding calculators from the links, so you'll need to navigate to them on the field office technical guide, which I will link. But there's a standard seeding calculator that when we're talking about filter strips, we're usually looking at some kind of like critical area seeding. So if you go to the standard seeding calculator and fill it out for critical area seeding, you check your moisture regime and pick from that list. Those will get you to meet the standard at minimum. So take a look at those like standard seeding mixes and see which ones fit best for the site and which ones fit best for that producer's needs for forage. If you don't want to do like a standard seeding mix, but you have some ideas for a mix that would still meet the standard, you can build it in that custom seeding calculator that I showed at one of our previous office hours. But if you have any questions on the seeding calculators, feel free to reach out. I can try to answer some of those questions on those calculators. And then again, I just recommend you talk to some of your farm bureau biologists too. Some of these sites, they can help you cite them and talk about some of the species and things like that. So we talked about this a little bit more in context with some of the native species, but I've worked with them on all sorts of wetland restorations and filter strips as well. So with that, if you guys have any technical questions on implementing these, citing them, things like that, give me a call. And with that, I can kick it over to Swarm to talk about some of the contracting requirements.
Thank you, Cody. This is kind of well, it's not kind of, it's a very new option within Swarm. So what does Swarm cost share for harvestable buffers? We'll cost share the establishment of the practice or up to 70% of the total cost to install, or 90% if there's a economic need for that. And then we will provide financial assistance, which is the an upfront payment of the average soil rental rate per acre per year for up to 10 or for 10 years, sorry. The difference with this is you're going to get a large sum of money upfront to pay for this, and it's going to be on the counties to figure out how to hold on to that and to pay it out to the producer. Next slide, please. So when can these practices be cost shared? They're only available for lands not eligible for CREP, or the Conservation Resource Enhancement Program. For areas or counties which are eligible for CREP, FSA can assist with determinations for specific sites, because we do have some counties that are not fully covered by CREP, only partially, and areas within those counties would be eligible for the harvestable buffers. As with CREP, the land must be adjacent to an eligible water body. We're addressing a resource concern, and it's been in ag production for the last 4 of 6 years. Slight difference from this and CREP is that determination of 4 to 6 years is based on the publication of the last farm bill for CREP, which was 2018. For harvestable buffers, it is the most current years. And the buffers should be 30 to 150 feet wide. Next slide, please. So there's definite difference here with county responsibilities with using this conservation practice. Again, it's going to be up to the county to determine and manage for the financial aspects. Some counties previously have set up an escrow account, and they'll do a yearly payment after they have viewed the site to make sure everything is in compliance. It's also up to the county to determine how to mark the buffers and to monitor them over the 10-year period. Swarm can pay a renter, but the landowner will still need to sign the contract as well, and the contract will be recorded with the Register of Deeds in the county. This is not a have to, this is a suggestion. We would suggest more formal agreements between landowners and renters to clarify roles and responsibilities in case a renter leaves after a contract has been signed during that 10-year period, just to lay it all out up front, because it is a longer period than we usually deal with cropping practices in Swarm. Next slide, please. So when could land in CREP areas be eligible? I'm not talking about land in a county that's partially covered by CREP. I'm talking about a piece of land in an area that CREP would be eligible. There are 2 very narrow places or opportunities where this could happen. If the land is owned and operated for less than 1 year, unless received as a result of death of previous owner, foreclosure, or able to prove the land was not acquired with the express intent of enrolling in harvestable buffers or CRP, or if the landowners have an adjusted gross income greater than the 900,000 limitation per person required for CRP. Those would eliminate these properties from being eligible for CRP, but could potentially be eligible for harvestable buffers. Next slide, please. Again, we've updated the contract to have continuing compliance statements, which will apply to this 10-year practice. And also you'll be able to find harvestable buffers in the drop-down as you're used to finding with other practices in Swarm. Next slide, please. We also have a new resource, the Certification for Non-Engineering Practices, or Form 025 on the webpage. That's in Section 3 of the Swarm Grant Resources. This is a tool for counties to use in setting up continuing compliance, with a place for landowners and county to sign. This is, again, just a tool that we created to help facilitate the conversations that need to occur around these practices. It helps you identify resource concerns, long-term maintenance, and again, it's not required for reimbursement at this time. And I just realized I did not update the practice codes in there. So this also applies to harvestable buffers. Next slide, please. And in the reimbursement form on page 2, we have added a new section for non-engineered practices and multi-year cropping practices, basically where the county will verify that there is a multi-year plan in place and everyone knows what it is and they're going to be moving forward with maintaining that plan. And again, I'm going to stop myself. In earlier documents, you would have seen that we had harvestable buffers listed as a structural or bond practice. Upon further discussion and we've decided that we're going to switch that to a SEG practice. So it is going to be a SEG practice, which means nutrient management checklist is required at the reimbursement. And it gives more flexibility for the amount of funding that may be required to establish some of these buffers. I think that's it, Cody.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Susan. So that wraps up the DATCAP presentations. At this point, we'd like to just open it up for questions. Folks can feel free to type questions into the chat box or come off mute if you're comfortable. But we'll just kind of open it up at this point. Any questions out there?
We must be getting very good at these presentations. There's nothing left to ask.
Well, DATCAP staff can certainly stick around. Oh, looks like Scott just chatted a question here.
Sure, Scott. It's kind of a two-part payment. The first payment will be for establishment of the practice, and that'll be a traditional cost share, 70% of the cost to establish the practice. And then there's also the ongoing financial assistance, which is the 10 years of soil rental payments that will be paid upfront by DATCAP to the counties. And we're going to leave it up to the county's discretion how those funds are distributed to the landowner. They can be used as a tool for keeping things in compliance. They can be paid up front, and then the compliance is on the county to just make sure everything is as it should be. Are there any other specific questions you have about that? Oh, thank you. That was fun. I didn't know you could do that.
I have a follow-up question. This is Katie at Washington County.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. How is DATCAP going to decide the average rental rate? And then if you're paying it all up front, sometimes we have landowners that say, well, how do I know the rental won't go from 200 to 250 in 5 years? Like, I don't want to get locked in at just 200 an acre for the next 10 years. Do you know if DATCAP's gonna kind of incrementally increase the payment? Assume like an increase every year for the 10 years, or how is it gonna work?
The numbers are going to be based on the federally available numbers at that given time when it is contracted. And no, it's a gamble. We're paying up front for 10 years locked in at the rate that the year that you pay it or that you contract it.
So it's a straight rate.
It's a straight rate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that is using the county average soil rental rate as well.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Any others out there? And I will say DATCAP staff can stay on for a few minutes as well if folks were more comfortable chatting afterwards. Okay, and the one last thing I'll say just to kind of wrap up is just a reminder, our last office hour for the AdCap 50 changes will be on November 12th from 10 to 11. Randy Zogbaum is going to be kind of tying all these new practices together talking about how they fit into kind of soil health planning, systems level planning for the farm. So focusing a bit more on, how do we stack practices for soil health benefits and such. So hope you all can tune in for that one. Again, DATCAP staff will be staying on for a couple minutes if anybody did want to ask any questions or share any thoughts. Otherwise, thank you for joining and have a good day.